بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. Continuing on our lessons on Islamic parenting, last week we've stopped at the age range of 4 to 5, so preschoolers, and we're talking about some of the challenges associated, or not challenges, maybe milestones and things that are associated with preschoolers. And we spoke about education, and we're going to continue on that today, inshallah. And the conversation that we were focusing on had to do with stories, using storytelling and reading fictional stories to teach morals and etiquette and vocabulary. And we stopped on this quote by Imam Ibn Abil Izz al-Hanafi, rahimahullah, where we were speaking about teaching children language. And I just wanted to draw on that point a little bit more before continuing. Here, the Shaykh, rahimahullah, he told us that when it comes to teaching the children, and he breaks into two, reading and vocabulary. He says there that when you teach the meaning of a sentence, you begin by telling the meaning of the individual words. When you teach a child how to talk, you say a word and pointed object refers to, and if it's something physical. You say, for example, milk, red, mother, father, sky, earth, sun, moon, water, and so on. Point along with that to the objects you name, and otherwise you cannot teach the meaning of any word or convey any idea. And no human being can dispense with auditory learning. And obviously the Shaykh Rahimahullah was speaking about this in relation to an Aqeedah issue, right? But what concerns us is this idea that a helpful methodology in teaching children how to speak is that you start with teaching them concrete objects, concrete ideas, or objects around them, and then you escalate to learn abstract ideas. So this is a very helpful learning tip. It's very difficult to teach children, for example, ideals like, love and mercy, and these are ideals. These are abstract concepts. Even time, as you can tell, is an abstract concept, right? The idea of time, right? Physically, they can see a watch or a clock, but when kids got to be a little bit older before they can really grasp what time it is. Right? They can tell in the beginning by things like the sun is setting or the sun is rising, but you get the point. Educators, they always encourage to start with concrete objects. And this is why the Sheikh mentions, you give the example, like milk, bread, mother, etc., and you point to it. So for example, you want to teach a child vocabulary, you say, this is milk, and you show them a cup of milk, or you show her a cup of milk, and then they can see what it is, and they learn from that. And then later on, you develop progressively when they have more vocabulary and awareness of their concrete world, that you can start to introduce to them objects like, abstract ideas like pain and happiness and sadness and right and wrong, etc. That's a very helpful thing that the Sheikh mentioned. Of course, this is something also that is agreed upon. On top of that, we also can add to this that it's helpful to teach children have them have experiences about with their environment, and to help them introduce them to new words. So you take them to places, and usually when parents and educators want to teach children and new ideas and new concepts about the world and their surrounding world, they take them on a class trip or field trip at the end of study. But some educators advise that it's good to introduce children to things at the beginning of study so they can familiarize themselves with it. Then you go ahead and try to explain it and have them to know it. Anyway, it's just a point of reference, but that's a nice point. Concrete objects and abstract. And the Sheikh's methodology when it comes to teaching children to read, he says, obviously, you got to have words and then sentences. So I just filled in the blanks, right? When it comes to teaching children how to read, right, and it's helpful to know this now, you have to begin first by teaching children the alphabet, actual letters of the English language or any language, and the sounds those letters produce. Then you teach them how to blend the sounds. Right? So children know A, B, C, but then they have to know how to blend, A with B or the C with A, etc. Blending sounds. And later on, if they can blend sounds, they can form words. And once they can form words, they can read sentences. Obviously, and these are just like a very summarized way of doing it, but obviously phonetics and there's a whole by phases and steps, etc. But that's a helpful thing as well, that if you want to get the kids who are preschoolers to get reading, you start with the alphabet and the sounds, then blending the sounds, then forming the words, then reading sentences, and then reading lots of books. So I just want to highlight those two methodologies from the statement of Imam Ibn Izz as just something to show that there is validity to a lot of the methodologies that we find when it comes to teaching children language. Obviously, for numbers and numeracy, you would teach them, all right, first with numbers, and then how to, right, the step of counting 1 to 10, using the fingers, etc. Right, and using objects, concrete, later on to abstract. When it comes to adding, subtracting, that kind of stuff, much later, right? So this is something I want to highlight. Going forward now, at age 4, children are not eligible to join junior kindergarten. And this is why at starting at 4, going on to 5, and really 5 to 6, you might say is like the real, stage where children become schoolers, right? As school-age children. This leads obviously to the inevitable question: what kind of schooling should parents offer their children, right? Public school, Islamic school, homeschooling. And so we'll talk about that today, inshallah, mainly because it's obviously a very big discussion parents they have. And obviously, there are many considerations that parents have to add, right? And the considerations obviously have to do with the Islamic side of things. They have to do with the logistics. They have to do with the capacity and, right, how feasible is it to do, for example, homeschooling and etc. So we'll talk about that, and we'll focus a lot on what is available for parents to do, but also the reality of these methods, because truth be told, it's a lot easier said than done, right? When we talk about choosing Islamic school or homeschooling or even public school, right? Even though we'll see public schools very, very, very discouraged, right? And the ulama, they're very clear about that. Where are the parameters? When can someone go there? When is it not allowed to go there? And these kind of things. And so we need to think about this, right? And also parents should, before a child reaches school age, have already decided the method that they want to take, right? That way there's not much differing and delay in the transition between preschool learning and full-time learning. So let's get right into it, right? So starting out 5, right, we said 4 is JK, but really 5 upwards, this is what you call school-age child. Now they're going to school full-time, right? This is when a child is really immersed in full-time learning. They have, right, entire different schedule than a preschooler. This is the time children are also interacting with a lot of classmates and peers. This is what a lot of the different challenges come, because now in school, there's lots of things, right? Milestones for education, development, etc. So for parents, the first question, right, because schooling goes from age 4 for JK, but if you want to go grade 1, grade 6, from 6 years of age, all the way to 18, right? So I think from grade 1 all the way to grade 12, or you want to go JK all the way to grade 12. That's, considerable amount of years, right? Children doing more than about 14 years of schooling. So the parents need to make a critical decision. What kind of schooling are they going to offer their kids? What is the viability of that? How successful are those types of models? And we start with public school, because public school is the most common form of schooling that we have in this country and most of the countries in the world. But when we say public school has to be decoupled from the idea of being something which is all across the board the same. In the Western countries, public school is really non-Muslim schools. That's what we're using the term. So when we say a madrasa al-hukumiyya, right, like a government state school, or madrasa al-amma, we're not talking about just a public school. Right? In the Western world, when we say public school, we're actually talking about non-Muslim school, right? School which is either number 1, secular, so it's atheistic or secular, godless, or number 2, Catholic, Christian kind of school, or number 3, Jewish, right? Although that's very rare, people go to there, but these are the schools, like stateless, right? Secular state schools or Christian-oriented schools. So this is what we're talking about public school, because we live in the Western world. These are our public schools. If you lived in the Arab world or lived in the Muslim world, there's public schools and private schools. And then they have what they call Western or foreign school, international schools. It's a very different, right, kind of discussion when we see this. So when we're using the term public school here, we're talking public schooling in Western countries, or what scholars call non-Muslim schools, schools which were either secular, right, so godless, right, there's no religion being taught, or a religion that's not Islam. In this case, mainly largely Christianity, right? So when we look at this, what is the scholarly ruling? What's the hukum shar'i for a child being put in that kind of school? So the first thing we should know is that there is a room for a flexibility in the ruling. So we're going to give the hukum am first, the general ruling, and then we'll discuss some of the exceptions, right? Like in terms of the exemptions, because not everybody is the same. Every parent has the same situation, right? And sometimes there are some very select reasons or needs that may arise. A child might need to go to public school. So what I've done now, I just pulled some of the fatwa of the ulama onto the screen with the sources and a summary of what they've said in order to get an idea. So as you can see here, majority, right? So these are just four. And of course, there are many other fatwa out there. Majority of our scholars are of the opinion, right, that contemporary scholars, right, and I'm going to get to how many, right, of the different scholars, but majority are of the opinion of contemporary scholars that non-Muslim schools, whether they be in the Muslim world or whether they be in the non-Muslim world, right, the Western world, are haram because of due to the great harm and dangers present therein. Okay, so this is the ruling. That's the general ruling. That is right, the default ruling, if you want to use that term. And so to begin with, we have the fatwa of the Permanent Committee, Al-Lajnatu Da'ima, right, the Permanent Committee of Saudi Arabia. There's a link in English where they were summary of their answer when asked about parents who are putting their kids in English and French schools in order to gain a better future. This is the question says, to gain a better future. And they said, the Lajna, the Permanent Committee, it is not allowed to send Muslims, or this is my summary, of course, so they said in more detail, but I summarized that it is not allowed, in their opinion, to attend, for Muslim children to attend non-Muslim schools with the intention better in the future because of the harms therein, right? And the argument is very sound, right? That in the public schools, there are many types of dangers, and we're going to explain them shortly. So that's the Permanent Committee. Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen rahimahullah was specifically asked for a question from the Americans about Saudi Arabia expats who live in the West taking their kids to non-Muslim schools to learn English and language. And the Sheikh's summary, he said, it's not allowed to enroll Muslim children in non-Muslim schools in Western countries, in a Western country, with the intention of learning English, because children pick up things quickly, and the haram that's in, because they mentioned the question, there's mafasid, they're evil there, right? Obviously, we know in terms of character, belief, all kinds of things. So he said if they attend such schools, then that evil that is present there, the children will absorb, and it'll be very difficult to remove it. So, and this is in Liqa'at wal Fatawa al Aqliyat al Muslim, a book, Sheikh Uthaymeen's questions and answers about Muslims living as minorities. It's an excellent book where the Sheikh's Fatawa was gathered when the Sheikh came to America in 2001, and other questions that people called in from America, from Britain, from all across the world about Muslim minority questions, right? Questions to deal with us here. It's a very nice book on Fatawa. So this is very specific Sheikh's talking about in terms of our circumstances, not generally, even though there's other fatwas like that. Sheikh Muqbil rahimahullah also, who came to America. And I keep mentioning this point because there are some people who have this kind of, obviously not us, but there are some people who might not be aware that the ulama, they travel, right? They've been to the Western world. They've seen, they saw, they observed, and they've also been told about what is happening in those environments. So it's not like they're speaking out of turn or out of place or somehow out of touch. Sheikh Muqbil rahimahullah, in one of his books, Tuhfat al-Mujib, which is a book, he answered questions from those who were near and those who were far, questions from the West, questions from the East, questions when he came to America, questions about America. So Sheikh Muqbil rahimahullah was asked by French students and questioners about sending their children to French public schools out of the number one, a need to learn, but also out of pressure that if they don't send their children there, that there's going to be repercussions. As we know, Europe is much, much more adamant, or I would say maybe intolerant when it comes to the idea of alternative schooling. I'm not saying all of Europe, many European countries. And so in that situation, like France, Sweden, and other countries like this, it's not very easy to opt out your children out of school, to just de-enroll them. It's not easy, right? But he was asked, but with the intent, with the point that if they do take their kids out of these schools, there could be mashakil, issues coming to the kids. Sheikh's summary was, it is haram for a Muslim to study in non-Muslim schools in a Muslim country and a non-Muslim country. Sheikh didn't beat around the bush there. And obviously, if you look at what the Sheikh Rahmanullah's statement there, it's not far-fetched when we look at what we know as people who, many of us probably went to public school, are aware, right? We saw with our eyes, we experienced our own lives. We know what goes on in public school, and definitely isn't something any child, right, should be witnessing and get involved in. And last fatwa I put out here, Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd, rahimahullah, he actually wrote a very fantastic book. It's probably, one of the unique books of the Sheikh. It's called International Foreign Colonialist Schools, Their History and Dangers. Sheikh Bakr, rahimahullah, he wrote this book way early, and he documented the first emergence of foreign international schools in the Western world, in the Muslim world, and he's talking about Christian schools, right? The schools of the Jesuits and the Catholics and the Jesuits and other such groups. He was very familiar, the Sheikh, and also he, in the Muqaddimah, or like the beginning, he actually did like a whole discussion about the history of the arrival, what did they want, what do they try to gain, and all this stuff. And he connects it clearly to a colonialist project. The international schools he calls it's one of the intellectual efforts of the Christian intellectual warfare or intellectual imperialism. And he documents all of that. He talks with the Fatawa of the Ulama. He documents over 19 different scholars in the past until the present who warned, who have prohibited, who have called alarm about that. And the Sheikh's summary, after he mentions a lot, is not allowed to open, not allowed to attend non-Muslim schools in the Muslim world, and due to the great harms and risks they pose. And the Sheikh mentions many, many examples of that, but also the rationale. And he's talking about international foreign schools. As we know, many American and Christian schools have opened. Question says, like residential schools, but in a mild way. Well, yeah, residential schools obviously have way worse in terms of what they did to the kids. But yeah, in many ways, there were seminaries to teach Christianity under the guise of secular study, right? So think about it as ways to brainwash, right? We wouldn't say it's exactly residential school because we know the abuse is physically and otherwise gone there. But yeah, it was designed to change the mind of the students, right? And obviously to be innocent too, because it's education, right? Soft spot, because Islam is all about learning deen, and also Islamic religion heavily learning of the ilm dunya to benefit the community. So the Shaykh, rahimahullah, his argument has so many proofs and reasons, but one of the things he mentioned very interesting, which is to do with the environmental harms of these kind of institutions. And he mentions that the Prophet ﷺ told us in one hadith that it's the parents. Every Muslim is born, every human child is born a Muslim, right? And so it's the child, the parents who ultimately make them a Jew, Christian, or a fire worshiper. And the Shaykh mentions here that the child is born innocent, and also will continue upon that path, but external environmental causes, in this case parents, alter that child towards a corrupted environment. Imagine Christian-oriented or Christian-focused schools, or in secular schools, or schools designed to teach against Islam. Their influence will be even more so on the child than what the parent would do. And he mentioned that ultimately, if the Prophet told us that children will get infected by the environment, starting from the internal, the home, right? Because the home is where a child is first taught. And at home, the parents introduced him to what we call tarbiyah, right? The educational process. He's imagined then the environment of these schools. And that's a very clear, strong argument that whatever benefit is gained, it cannot be ignored. It cannot be weighed against, or cannot be equated to the harm that comes from it. And I think the fatwa of the ulama are very old, right? You might say, because we live now in 2022, we know full well, right? Almost all of us, what's going on in the news, what's going on in the schools, and the situation is very clear that it's very, very bad. Public schools have got so bad that even regular, right, Westerners and non-Muslims who frequent those schools are themselves pulling the children out. Hence why there's a rise of homeschooling and the rise of public or online schooling because of the dangers of these public schools. So if that's something that's understood, the parents who are raising the children and wanted to fulfill the amana, they would steer clear as much as possible and to the best of their ability from public institutions where there's these kind of issues. And somebody may say, well, what about if you can't? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. But we're talking about the hukm asl. When we look at today what's happening, a lot of parents may believe that the public institutions will produce great benefit for children. They're going to improve their graduation rate of the child. It's going to improve the child's exposure to many ideas or programs where the child can become successful, and etc., etc. And you know how it is, right? When they say these kind of things. But today, those arguments don't fly, right? Because we have enough evidence to show that, in fact, or it's conflicting. Let's say it's not conclusive evidence, right? But there is a lot of studies have shown that public kids who are homeschooled are not only equivalent, right, to people who went to public schools. In fact, they even have a higher graduation rate, or some studies have shown they have higher success rate. Some studies have also shown that they also have better outcome in life. Of course, there's competing studies, so I'm not going to make it conclusive. There's a lot of studies, but good number of studies showing that the idea that public schools are the only way is no longer something equivalent or acceptable as an argument, because data is coming out, and even as time progresses, we're getting more and more clarity on that. So this idea that if you don't go to public school, your child is going to be behind, you're not going to be able to have social skills. I just read just a minute ago before coming on to today's lesson on Psychology Today, but they were looking at some of the studies, just the article published last year, that so when it comes to social skills, children who are homeschooled have equivalent, on par social skills as kids who went to public school. And some instances, children who went to public school have more, obviously, social skills. And that's only because the children who didn't have good social skills due to homeschooling, it wasn't homeschooling, it was the fact that they didn't have accompanying opportunities or to mix with others and peers, etc. So parents who did the full kind of scope, homeschool, and also offered social gatherings, those children are on par. Right? So all of these kind of things that we today are what we call the anxieties of alternative schooling are not actually as rooted in the evidence. But what's even more disturbing is that even if we were to argue that yes, there is a benefit of taking physics in public school or robotics class and all these clubs that they have, they get. I'm going to talk about that in a second. That there's advantages public school has, right? They have greater funding, taxpayer dollars. They have more highly educated teachers, right? They have greater ability to facilitate events. But what cost? And this is the thing that we need to think about as parents. The Shari'i is saying, and the ulama are saying it's haram, because it comes to the cost of our aqidah, it comes to the cost of our akhlaq and adab, or manners of the children. It comes to the cost of, even now, children who are apostating or doubting their faith. Worse, they're getting involved in major and minor sins, and missing their prayers. You name it, all these things that happen. Jum'ah Salah, right, being put on hold, getting involved in free mixing. And so when we look at all of this, we have to then say that, well, what cost of public schools right, what are they costing us, right, to go there? And we can't be using the argument of the monetary argument of freedom, right, or free, right? The free model is free. No, it's not free. It's paid by tax dollars. But then for everything that's free, there's an opportunity cost, and there's also a hidden cost that's actually, right, in this case, a religious moral cost. So we need to be clear that we should also encourage our community, right, Muslims community, to avoid public schools unless, of course, there's a need for that, and certain, like you might say, specific needs. But I want to mention that this is for the parents who are obviously know in the beginning, and many of us who've been to public schools already know this. So we will steer our children away from this altogether. But we have to know from the beginning it's haram. That's what the ulama are saying. Not halal. They're not saying it's, they're saying haram. And so with that being said, what are the reasons for that? So I just divided the dangers of public schools, non-Muslim schools into three areas, right? Number one is to do with the curriculum. And the first part is the curriculum. And what you notice here is that the curriculum, someone will say, what's wrong with the curriculum? Is it haram to study science or math or something? No, it's not that. It's what they're studying along with that. So, for example, we know there's evolution being taught in biology without any, right, kind of religious considerations or restrictions or comparisons. They're studying, of course, religions like world religions class, or they're studying other religions or other ideas, and there's a lot of atheism being taught, right? There's lots of liberalism and other isms connected to that, right? Feminism, and now the LGBT issue that is obviously, right, a big issue now, especially in the schools, right? Considering that as a secular school, we understand that this is what they'll be teaching, this is what they adopt, but then what about the minority, right? The children who come in different faith backgrounds, who their religion is opposed to that. These are considerations. What about, for example, the study of music, right? How many of us, when we went to school, we had to engage in that, right? And of course, without our knowledge, right? Us being knowledgeable, we're kids. We didn't know any better. Drama, dance, you name it. So curriculum is not just the math and science. This is naivety, right? To be honest, and when we say, "Oh, public schools are so good to teach good math and science," yes, and they also teach drama to your kids. How many kids opt out of that? They teach philosophy at the grade 12 level. I've looked at the curriculum content there. These are things that we have to be cautious of. On top of the fact, as we know, right, whatever good is there, there's also wrong. That's the first thing. And while it's not haram to learn evil, just to be aware of it, it's haram to learn evil and not be able to correct it and to counter it and to problematize it, right? If you're learning evil just for sake, and our children are just, or Muslim children are adopting it, this is not exposure, the correct exposure or education that is, trying to combat evil. It's just learning and accepting it. Number two, the environment. We already know, we don't have to talk too much about that. Public school environment is full of wrong. For example, free mixing with the genders, right? The biggest issue that is immediate, right? Which is leads to so much haram. Music being played, right? Also the anthem, right? Question says, what about the national anthem in these public schools? Yeah, you got to stand up for the anthem. I mean, you don't have to be honest. You can sit down. So there's that flexibility on that side. But the thing is that they don't just play the national anthem. And even if you try to ignore it, there's also the music that's played right up there sometimes too. At least when I remember when I was in school, they used to, in order to get students to get to class, they would have the music playing so they can hasten you to get to class in high school, I remember middle school. So music everywhere, there's violence and bullying. That's a serious issues there. There's also drugs, right? Depends on the higher level schools and what environment you're in. Even the lower schools, there's dances. There's, they have events like that, proms in grade 12, etc. So a parent puts your kids there and the kid become desensitized to these evils. They know it's wrong, but they're pressured, right? And the fear of missing out, as they say, right? Because it's a double-edged sword. The parents have to speak to their children about these things, not in public school, but in general, that, when it comes to evil, there's always going to be a catch-22. If you do the haram, you're going to feel guilty. If you stay out of the haram, you're going to feel, what are you going to feel? Fear of missing out. Oh man, I think we're having fun there. It's a catch-22. Shaitan's going to come to you in both ways. Yeah. Well, first of all, the nafs is built to feel guilty. Nafsul lawwama. But when you that's when you do the wrong, because you peer pressure to do it. But when I say when you avoid it, the strength of your iman, when you avoid it, you're still going to feel like in the back of your head, Shaitan will be trying to tempt you. So think about these. We have to think about these things in teaching our children, especially about why wrong is wrong. We need to also explain to them the idea that, look, I know you might be feeling this way, or you might be thinking you're missing out on what these people are doing, but truth be told, there's no real regret, right? As many of us who went to public school can admit. Lastly, the educators, right? A lot of these are professionals, and they are experts at teaching, or they have, professional licenses. And when it comes to moral standing, a lot of public school teachers are not moral examples for our children, right? Even if they're good, people or good teachers in terms of what they try to do for the kids and educationally, when it comes to their everyday lives and their behaviors, we as Muslims have a higher Islamic moral grounding, and we want our children to look up to their teachers as good role models in deen, in religion, in character, in language. And that's another thing that it can be very difficult Because if you have a good teacher and they're non-Muslim, obviously we're not saying you can't learn math and science from a non-Muslim. We're saying that as a role model. Think about your child spending so many hours with someone who, are not always good role models. Right? I can remember examples of bad educators when I grew up, but these educators, was uniquely about them is their character also, for good or bad, what they used to say in class, what we're about from the children. So that's a consideration parents have, because whatever is being done in school, if it's not paralleling what's being done at home, it's going to create that dissonance, that wedge, right? That it's going to mix messaging and it's going to be confusion. And so these are just three overarching um, kind of considerations when it comes to the public schools. Question is how to solve this with college level classes. Well, college university is a little bit different, right? In the sense that it's not a must to go there, right? Public schooling, right, or at school up to 18 is a must. Whereas college, it has the same problems, but the thing is, like, you have a great amount of autonomy and liberty, and so therefore scholars, right, for the most part, are also of the same opinion that it's haram to go to those institutions because they have the same evils. But then there is also some fatwa the scholars also have about what we can call special conditions or considerations to somebody going to these institutions to get, some degree or some kind of a certification for the future, and that they're going to avoid these things. For public schools, very different, right? If we don't understand, high schools are conforming environments. You have to conform. There's no liberty. It's very difficult to opt out without backlash. On top of that, there's online schools for universities and college, alhamdulillah, right? And that's another consideration topic for altogether. As Muslims, we advocate not just homeschooling for young people, we also advocate alternative schooling for all Muslims, because as the question mentioned, it doesn't really make too much sense to homeschool our kids up until grade 12, and then that throw them into the deep end in the university campuses, which would definitely going to sink, if not sink, if they're not already given that kind of warning. So we have to also seek alternative studies, and that's another discussion. But online schooling, that's the best. That's what we have to be advocating a lot for, and alternative studies. And it's a discussion that needs to be had another time. But when it comes to the wajibs to schooling for kids, public schooling is very dangerous, right? And the harms that it comes with, in these non-Muslim schools cannot be overlooked. They cannot be overlooked. So our scholars are very clear on that. Now, someone may say, okay, what about if I cannot avoid it? In that case, we'll say that a person, if they're not able to avoid it because they can't afford to go to Islamic schools, they can't, they don't have the family circumstances or the family, what they call the financial or family dynamics or the time and energy to homeschool. In those cases, if there's an inability to go to to avoid public school, that some scholars do permit parents going to public school with conditions. And one of those conditions is that the harm that is found in those schools cannot outweigh the benefit that's coming. Means that, let's say, because they cannot physically do it, or they cannot afford the public Islamic school, then they're going to send their kids to public school. Number one, it has to be the condition that they teach the Islamic education and the tarbiyah is done at home and in the weekends, weekend programs, and the masjid and different lessons. They have to combat what's being taught in public school. They have to be openly conversing with the children about these things. Number two, they have to also ensure that whatever is happening in the school doesn't outweigh what they're trying to obtain from it, the benefit of the schooling, the education that is free. If that cannot be achieved, then they have to also opt out of it and find a way. Or fears Allah, Allah will find a way out for them. So we do agree there's some people who cannot afford Islamic schools, or it could be the case there's no Islamic schools in the area, or they can't homeschool because they don't have the educational level. As we'll see, there's pros and cons of both homeschooling and Islamic schooling. They have pros and cons. And what we need to know is the hukm asl, the origin rule, is what we're trying to aspire for. So where there's a will, there's a way. But what's happening, and what has happened for so long, is that parents just trust their kids in public school because that's the easiest and most convenient option. And a lot of times that's all that our parents really knew, right? They weren't so educated about the alternatives, or maybe they did know, but they couldn't afford. Or, for example, another alternative would be a child who has special needs. In that kind of situation, there is clear need that a child might need a speech therapist, right? But they might need, to have a special ed program or ESL program, which many Islamic schools don't offer. Right. So with that being said, these are examples, of alternatives, right? Speech pathologists also like this. So if that's the case, then that's allowed because there's a need that's pressuring the parent to do it and they can't find it elsewhere. But what we don't want and shouldn't do is just put the kids in public schools and non-Muslim schools. Think it's okay And what's happening is it's kind of all autopilot, right? Kind of, there's no follow-up, there's no investigation, there's no idea what's being taught. There's not even visitation, right? My parents, Allah Musta'an, they haven't even been to the building. They don't even go there and see who are these students, who are these classmates are the children hanging around with, what are they doing in the free time? So much times you would notice that, what happens in classrooms in liberal environments, right? And our kids obviously then have a hard time fitting into identity if they can't find confirmation and reinforcement of their identity if they only see things which oppose it. And what opposes it seems to be obviously beautiful because Shaitan beautifies it. And we know in rule in general that you go with the majority. So Allahu Musta'an. So if we understand all of this point, now we need to move to the next point, which is that, well, if this is off the table, unless there's a need and a very big pressing reality or need for parents to do that, to go to public schools, what about Islamic schools, right? So scholars, they talk about, and this is just a fatwa I've taken from Al-Iftah, from the Da'ima Permanent Committee, where they mention, there was a question asked about opening Arabic or Islamic schools. Is it a community obligation of the community? And do we have to do it? And the permanent committee, right, in summary, what they say there, as you can read, is that it's a must, right? In some cases, they say financing these schools may be an individual obligation of specific governments or Islamic groups because of the awareness of these unions and their schools when the government and the group has, let's say, wealth and power. So it's a collective responsibility to the government. And in many ways, us Muslim minorities living here, open Islamic schools for our community because there's so many Muslims in Canada and in the Western world, and we don't have enough Islamic schools to go around. So sometimes you can't even blame. You can't blame, right? Many of the parents who live in certain localities where there is no Islamic school. It's very hard to say, oh, well, why don't you go to Islamic school? Well, I can't go if there's none. Or why don't you homeschool? Well, as we'll see, everyone can, right? So we need to think about also the responsibilities of the community to do that and to also fund these things, because right now the model for many parents is that children's education is left to the public industry because it's free, and we're paying the cost with our children either leaving Islam or severely weakened Muslims or Muslims with dual identities, identity crises, etc. So with that being said, let's now look at Islamic schools versus homeschooling. Right, and this is a quick summary. This is it's a world itself, a portal itself, where there's the study and discussion. And the idea is that they both have advantages and disadvantages. If parents know that from the beginning, they need to obviously think about that deeply before making a decision as to what school they give their kids. Some parents are more equipped and capable of giving their children homeschooling. Others cannot. So they need to think about, okay, so if I can do homeschooling, how much does Islamic school cost? Where is Islamic school? What is the best Islamic school, etc. And then when it comes to homeschooling, is also in preparation for that. Okay, how do you homeschool? What's the curriculum you should be using? What is one of the difficulties of homeschooling, etc. Right? And so this is an important discussion that has to come way before a child is school aged, because if a child parents are not sure of this, they're going to start winging it, right, or start making really rash decisions, and this can affect the child's also their the education, right? You might notice many children, they go to one school one year, then another school another year, and I personally witnessed that, right? A lot of children who go to Islamic school and they might be on public school the next year, and they might come back, and all these confusions, it impacts the child, the same way that we know that a child who's always moving around, parents who are always moving here and there, this country, that country, and the child never gets grounded in any language or doesn't get grounded in any culture. Then they have what they call global, not always, but they can develop what's called global, disorder, global development disorder, where a child is just behind, the GDD, and that's another issue that is to be discussed another time. So these are things that need to be thought about, because again, as a Islamic school teacher myself, I've seen it. I see Islamic schools, the goods, the bad. I see also the challenges that are there, but also how parents think, and parents have to make the plan. And when they're serious, they're azamta fatawakal Allah. When they make the plan, just put your trust in Allah. And so let's take a look at the pros and cons of both types of schooling. So we have the top pros, and then we have cons. And so both of them have pros and cons. And the reason why we're saying that is that we shouldn't think Islamic schools are perfect, nor is homeschooling perfect, or maybe one is preferable to the other. Depends on how on the family and the parents and where they're going. So to begin with, you have Islamic schools, or the pros. Children learn Islamic studies. That's if they go to Islamic school where they prioritize Islamic studies. Sadly, some Islamic schools don't prioritize Islamic studies, and it becomes almost an afterthought, and that's really dangerous because isn't it what parents are looking for? Some parents they want Islamic environment, right? They want Islamic environment. They want the public school curriculum, right? The ulterior curriculum minus the public school issues, and that is problematic because being in a safe space doesn't necessarily mean that a child is going to be a good kid, right? Knowledge leads to action. So that's a benefit, right? They learn the Tawheed, Aqidah, they learn Salah, Fiqh, and I think every parent, that's exactly what they want because they want help in learning, teaching your kids. As we'll get to later, whose responsibility is it to teach the children their deen? So on one end, one answer is it's the parents. The second answer is it is the parents who can also solicit the help of someone else. So for example, if a parent can't teach their kids something, let's say they can't teach their kids how to, read Arabic or Quran studies, they can always hire someone who can. That's fine. It's not haram. That's perfectly fine. But what's interesting is that, as we know, that public school, Islamic school can be that tool for parents. That look, maybe some parents look, I don't know all this stuff. I'm gonna take it to one who does. Number two, teachers are typically good role models for children. In Islamic schools, we have, for the most part, right, practicing Muslims. These are the teachers. They're gonna be the examples for the kids. Again, I say for the most part because not every time is the case that a teacher is a role model, but for the most part, so that's good for children to see adults who are practicing the deen just like them, pray with them, who read Quran, who encourage them good. And that's powerful because some of the parent kids who go to Islamic schools will have different family structures. They might need that, right? It could be for the boys to have male mentors who are actually, there for them if there's no father figure around. Or sometimes it could just be the fact that they have teachers who actually care about them and who are also helping them guide them through the difficult world that we live in. Third, the safe space. Right? Islamic schools typically are much safer because they're private school, right? It's much safer than public schools, right? Even though it's possible that they can be dangerous, but for the most part, you notice that violence, and the heavy crimes, right, are not there, right? Talking about drugs and violence and the fawahish, that kind of stuff is not there. Other types of harm are there, like public schools, like fighting, cyberbullying, and yeah, those things definitely will be in every school. But you get the point, safer. And fourth, children get to pray Dhuhr and Jum'ah easily. Right, that's one of the biggest perks that Salah is built into the curriculum. Kids in public school have to, as we probably all experience, have to go and pray by yourself. You have to go make your own prayer time lunchtime after school, you have to hasten. Whereas in Islamic school, they pray, and if they don't pray, that's an issue, right? So that's very nice, right? In Jummah, especially for the boys more so, because as they get older, it becomes wajib on them. And then we know in Islamic school, the public schools, Muslim schools, a lot of parents are not doing that. A lot of kids are not praying Jummah. It's a serious issue because a child who's not praying Jummah for 4 years of high school, for many years, what's the likelihood that they're just going to turn on that habit when they go to real life, right? And lastly, they have great opportunities with Tarbiyah. There's lots more opportunities in Islamic school to teach children about halal and haram, about good and bad, right? Because the public Islamic schools are moralistic schools, right? They have a moral element to their pedagogy, so they're not just teaching about secular studies. They stop and they add in the Islamic, viewpoints all over the place. And they have license to do that in class. They're allowed to by school to school to see where it best fits. In fact, you can also manipulate the curriculum in favor of that. So, for example, in our school, Islamic school, we don't, the kids do art, but they don't do drawing of faces and stuff like that, right? So you manipulate the curriculum in favor of the Islamic teachings, right? There's no drama, for example. Instead of drama, they do, like we said, art, but the art is also done Islamically. Or for example, you could bring in Arabic studies, right? That's what we do. I'm sure many Islamic schools have Arabic, right? So instead of just when they finished grade 9 French, when they get to grade 10, they could do another language instead of doing Spanish to do Arabic. Great benefits, right? But when it comes to even inside the classroom, all right, you can stop the class, you can talk about something. Whereas public school, because it's a secular institution, for the most part, is frowned upon to bring in very divisive ideas of religion because people are not all the same religion. The cons now, right, when it comes to Islamic school, they have its negative side too. Number one, the tuition, right? Islamic schools are expensive, right? And that means that not everyone can afford it, right? The minimum maybe cost is $300 a month, right? A minimum, right? They go upwards of very expensive, right? Some of the more elite Islamic schools in Mississauga, right? The few of them I have in mind, there can be tuitions more than $800 a month. Some of us probably be surprised. Tuition per year is equivalent to going to University of Toronto. So those are like issues that are very, very difficult. Comes a financial issue. So that's one. Number two, there may be long waiting lists because there's a lack of space. Many Islamic schools don't have big facilities. So if you wanted to enroll, it's very hard to get in because they're full. Or if they're not full, there is prioritization for older students or students who be there who signed up first come first served basis. You name it like this. So that could be also difficult. Schools lack funding and facilities found in public institutions. That's another problem. Islamic schools, because they're pretty much built on donations, that means, and tuition, that means they don't have a lot of the facilities. On average, in the public school, and almost in public schools, they get something like $1,500 a month per student from taxpayers. That's like, I remember the principal was telling me roughly that's the allocation per month per child, around 1,500, something like this, if I remember correctly. Whereas, like I said, Islamic school 300, and if you're talking about the upper end Islamic schools, it's something like, $800 still doesn't top this public school, which doesn't have any shortage of money. And I was reading America, for example, sometimes the public school and would offer something like per year $15,000, something like this, on average per year for a child. And that would have come down to about 1,500 a month, right? On top of this, some schools don't prioritize secular education. Some Islamic schools, they are not very good in their education, that's behind. Maybe the teacher's not as qualified, or maybe the children are put into Islamic programs, Hifz al-Quran, or there could be just the very ethos of the school could be focused more on just the tarbiyah, and the kids go behind, and that puts them in jeopardy for their future because of their maths and science and English is very weak, and they're paying money on top of that. It can be very problematic for a school because isn't that the joint idea of Islamic schools, both the dunya and the deen? And that's actually a concern as well. How well do Islamic school kids fare? I mean, that's the thing. The generalizations are on both sides, right? So there are students who do very poorly in Islamic school and don't be very successful, and there's kids who do very well, right? And oftentimes it boils down to how the parents are with their children, who's involved and invested, who isn't. And so, and obviously the school's effort and the capacity in there to do that. But also it's the same thing with public school. Right? Some kids in public school graduate, some don't, right? Some of them make it far. And a lot of actual academic studies have been done to take a look at, the Islamic school model and how viable and feasible is it. But with this being said, like it's important to know all this stuff because even many Muslims are not comfortable with Islamic schools because the Islamic schools that we do have are also differ in terms of the methodology. What kind of aqidah, manhaj methodology they teach to children. And that's why you might see that many Islamic schools have a lot of mukhalafat, right? Islamic oppositions, whether it be the political side of things or there be the laxity and liberal nature. Just the other day, when the principal was telling me one Islamic school in the city, they just recently had all girls only prom, Allah al-Musta'an, and this is the kind of things that are now creeping up into the community. Think about it long and hard, is the things that we're avoiding in public school coming our way, but in quote unquote Islamic means. So there's lots of issues like this that make sometimes Islamic schools, even depending on which one you go to. Now, with all that being said, you take a look at homeschools, right? Homeschools, they have advantages. The pros are the low costs. they're ultimately, as much as a parent wants to spend, it can't afford to spend. There's no such thing as, actual monthly cost, right? But there is obviously cost of materials, but they're still cheaper. You can buy pre-bought curriculums. You can, for example, well, it's not Ontario. I don't know why not, but I guess Ontario doesn't do it. But BC and other kinds of provinces, you can actually get paid. Yes, you can get paid. Teacher can get money. The parent can get money from the government to help fund for tutors and teachers, something like $1,000, or something like this to help them with the, the learning, right? So that's another kind of benefit that comes with this lower costs and how much a parent wants to spend. Is also alternatives to everything. Second, greater flexibility. Homeschooling has a lot of flexibility over the curriculum, and that's one of the advantages and timetables. So while kids wake up 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock or more for public school or regular private school, and finish 3 o'clock, parents can homeschoolers can start as early or late as they want. It's up to them. Studies have shown that children, if they succeed and they do better when they have a later start time, so there's advantages and incentives there. We know it's not good for children to wake up excessively early, especially if they slept late or if they're not sleeping well. So the idea is like starting 10 o'clock or 10:30, 11, whatever it is parents are feel comfortable with, can help the child be more alert. The bottom line is you could finish earlier, you could start earlier, you have all that flexibility. You also have flexibility of the curriculum. As for example, if you're teaching social studies to children, you can also teach them through Islamic means, because when it comes to elementary, especially because right now we didn't differentiate elementary from secondary, but when it comes to elementary homeschooling, because there's no credits involved, parents, as long as they're documenting the learning, as long as they're scrapbooking and keeping the notes and the things, they can teach anything underneath a anti-curricular expectation, so literally they can teach. And I know some parents who homeschool were telling me you can teach seerah and the battles of the Prophet and Sahaba as part of social studies. It counts instead of learning about the great pioneers and founding fathers, and that's great, right? So these are kind of advantages that come. Children are safe at home, so no safety issues. Home is where the heart is. Kids are always at home. Children can progress quicker. As we said, some of the kids, because public schools, this learning is limited, mostly lots of activities instead, and lots of off days and trip days and this day. And so if you want to accelerate your children's learning, shorter classroom time, less distractions, because it's not a big 20, 25 student class, a child can go quicker, right? Again, if they're talented or mashallah, bright and intelligent. So that's very helpful. Children have also increased time to do things like Hifz al-Quran and Islamic studies, and that's what I think most parents want for their kids. They want that extra time for Islamic studies and Hifz. So, for example, let's say a child gets their school done, instead of 3 o'clock, they finish by 1 o'clock. Pray Dhuhr around the time, they have a snack, whatever, then they can do Quran classes. So that balance is there, and that's great. Sometimes you can reverse the schedule, Quran first, studies later. This is beautiful. That's very helpful. Now the cons, right? Homeschooling requires one parent to be at home at least to facilitate the learning, or somebody to be responsible for the learning. So usually it's the mother, right? She stays home to be the homeschooling principal and the leader. Challenge obviously for that, it can be challenging, especially if the family structure is not in favor of that, or they need both parents to work, or some kind of arrangements. They have to facilitate that. They have to find a way around that. Right? So parents who, or families where they don't have that, it's very difficult. For single parent households, that's the big one, right? Because how can a mother or let's say a single mother household, if the mother is taking care of the child, at the same time she has to work and provide, it's very, very difficult. Second thing, it requires a lot of time and energy to plan activities. So homeschooling, it's lots of planning, lots of thinking, lots of researching. So parents have to be nifty, crafty. They have to be thinking. They have to really go out their way to these different, homeschooling conventions, books, go in Costco and, other places to get, good content for the kids, chapters, Indigo, Scholar's Choice, all this kind of stuff. So parents who have the energy to do that, mashallah. But some parents, as we know, that they will love to do it, but they're just tired, taking care of so many kids. If you have many kids, it's very hard to teach them all and feed them all and cook for the house and the cleaning. So it's very taxing. That's why not everyone can do it. Number three is that it can be hard to do if parents have many children. So if children are at varying degrees of their educational curricula process, for a mother, it can be very challenging to manage all their learning while managing the home. They might need a tutor or a aide, or they can also sometimes just neglect some children over the others, fine, because maybe one child is more demanding and more fussy, so they need to give them extra time. And then the other guy who needs his help, he's getting delayed. Next one, not every home is suitable for learning as learning space. So if you're gonna do homework at home, school at home, you need to have a nice home. Not a big one, but a place where it's suitable for learning to take place, right? If you go on YouTube, you see all kinds of amazing setups some parents produce for their kids to make it like designated homeschooling space. It's not necessary, but you get the idea. At least they have desks, places for lots of books and colorings and all this kind of stuff they need, right? Scissors and construction paper. And so it can be challenging if in some ways, because sometimes the housing situation might not be accommodating, and in public school, big spaces, lots of space, and also the space, if it's both home and learning space, parents have to be really careful to make sure a child knows which is which, but also not to damage the space, right? Through their different activities. And lastly, parents may need to hire a tutor for subjects that they themselves can't do. So when it gets to advanced math, post grade 6, a lot of parents may say like, that's the end of my math, because for all of us who are not math experts, or who are not good at math, or used to be good at math and forgot it all, it's not probably a good idea, or probably you don't have the time to relearn the math. So you need to pay for tutors, Kumon, Sylvan, and these kind of stuff. All those alternatives now, alhamdulillah, Khan Academy, there's IXL Math and English, and lots of alternatives. And the internet is really doing a great job in breaking down the walls. Right, from exit, you can get everything online now for you, alhamdulillah, almost. So there is not much difficulty, but that's another thing to take into consideration, that the more advanced the subject, the parent who's the leader or facilitator doesn't know the subject, they need to think about, should I educate myself? Should I hire a tutor? Who's this tutor? What should I do? Do I have another sibling who's older who can help me? Do I have family members? These kind of stuff. So at the end, the decision boils down to the capacity of the parents. What is comfortable for them? Which one is the most best, will produce the best outcome for them? So it's a personal decision. It should not be a decision that everybody will have the same answer on. Nor should someone think that if you homeschool your kids, it's a bad thing. You go to Islamic school, it's a better thing, or Islamic schools are not that good. Homeschooling is better. It's up to, ultimately everyone has their view. But if done right, if Islamic school is done right, like you're talking about the best you can get, if homeschool is done right, the best you can get, ultimately both of them are going to produce great results, but if done correctly. And that's why if you go to a bad Islamic school or not involved in it, you're not going to get good outcome. If you're homeschooling, you're nonchalant, you can also have a child who is behind, right? So this is just something to really consider. Questions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. How is homeschooling conducted? Are there materials parents follow to ensure child not fall behind? There is actually not much, So if a child never registered for a school in Ontario, they don't even have to sign up or anything. If they had schooling before, they just give a letter of intent to their home school and say that I'm going to homeschool child from now on. And usually there is sometimes, not always, they might send once a year, they might send an investigator or inspector to come to the house to see the child actually is learning, to see the evidence of learning. But a lot of times they don't do that, right? So essentially the parent has all responsibilities, which I should have added as another con, that a parent is fully responsible for child learning, which can be very burdensome and full of anxiety, because what if they're behind? What if they're ahead? How do you know? So that's why a lot of parents, what they try to do is they try to get the curriculum, and the curriculum is available online from Ontario. There's also a lot of books that go with the curriculum available online and in print you can buy. But parents have to also ensure to getting their kids tested, and they're trying the EKO in grade 3 and grade 6 and later in grade 10. They have to try to make measures. But that's one of the challenges homeschooling, right? If you don't really know how well your child is doing, they're doing very good, doing very bad, and that's what I think a lot of students and parents and others are worried, and there's actually a nice book that you could I can reference. It talks all about homeschooling. One mother, my non-Muslim mother, she did a whole website called, I think it's called Homeschooling Canada. There's also the Toronto Muslim Homeschooling Network. I think some of you probably know about it. Toronto Muslim Homeschoolers. There's that one run by Muslims, and there's also Homeschooling Canada, I think it's called, or Canadian Homeschoolers. And this woman, she has a whole book about how to homeschool the whole thing. She has courses on everything, even So you can actually get them her material and read how to do the thing and actually ensure their child doesn't go behind because she's successfully done it with many kids. There's also other websites that are very nice. Question is also, what are some of the ways children develop social skills and make friends if they're homeschooled? Well, homeschool is just part of the learning, right? But they don't only stay at home. So as the parents have to know the homeschooling is the educational thing, part of it, but then or the academic side of it. Then there's the other side, which is take your kids to the masjid. Right? They gotta go to the madrasa on the weekend or after school. They gotta go and talk to their family, their friends, their cousins, their aunts, their siblings. If the child has a sibling, they are going to be very social, But if they have like the family gatherings but if they don't have that, then obviously parents have to create those environments. They got to go field trips. Parents got to do it. And field trips don't have to be elaborate. You can go to the park, you can go to the mall, fire stations. These are free. Some libraries, museums. So parents have to do a lot of this stuff, and they have to get the child to engage, because, like I said, to develop social skills, as long as the child has those kind of environments, they will be social. It's a natural thing. It's when they're a single parent, single child with limited social engagements. This is where it gets a bit challenging. Or do they have some kind of, I don't know, could be like a kind of social anxiety or some kind of learning or behavioral issue, right? Or some kind of learning disability, then that would be a little bit different, right? Or something that they might be diagnosed with. But for the most part, like if parents are offering the right things, they're gonna get their kids going, right? Question says, are many Islamic homeschooling organizations to aid you in joining? Yep, exactly. So they got to use those organizations and to network with them. Question is, another con for homeschools that some countries don't allow it. Yeah, especially Europe, right? They don't allow uh, parents to homeschool. But here, alhamdulillah, we have full autonomy, right? So it's called letter of intent. The question is asking how to document as you mentioned. So document what you're doing when you do these different curriculum expectations, or you teach your children the various units. There's books you can buy, right, that show you different units and even the content. But really what it is that you have a curriculum document. Maybe another time we'll talk about it. When it comes to teaching kids, there's a curriculum document for every subject in every class. So for example, math grade 1, math grade 2, English grade 3, science, social studies, whatever. You have a curriculum. The Ontario government puts it online. You can get it on the website, the Ministry of Education. You download, you see expectations, 1.1, 1.2, A, B, whatever. It tells you an example. Children should be able to do this. Children should be, and then it gives you examples of what to do. So parents obviously doing that. There's also methodology of homeschooling. So there's a classical way where you do you follow a curriculum, and many homeschoolers don't do that. Many homeschoolers do what's called unschooling. Unschooling is the term John Holt came up with, which means you do not use a curriculum to teach your kids. I know it sounds crazy, but it does work. You use experiences and you use everyday, learning environment experiences and ideas to come up with learning. So instead of learning by subject, you learn by interests. Instead of having these expectations, like we said, the classical way of doing it, you just get stuff from online. You get stuff. You go outside. You talk to your children, and you fulfill the curriculum like that. As long as you're fulfilling different subjects, so it is a little bit different. Many parents actually prefer, and that's why it's very important for parents before they homeschool that they study all this stuff, unschooling. What is it? How do you do it versus traditional methods? And all this stuff. And maybe later we can gather all the resources, or I'll just share that book with that because homeschooling for Muslims, there's lots of stuff, but there's not as much content, but there's lots of good stuff online. So a parent has to know all this stuff. So like that way they're not gonna feel like their kids are behind. But if you do it the right way, you actually like have an idea of what to do, what subjects to cover, and you can advance your kid way ahead of their grade level. So for example, now because we have all this stuff online and so much less distraction for parents at home, children at home, children can quickly learn, right? Quickly learn, and we'll give some examples later. But you will have to study first how to homeschool, but there's one way to document scrapbooking. For example, children do social studies. You have a scrapbook for social studies. Here's some, little writing they did. Here's a little drawing they made, or here's like a little a diagram, or here's actual diorama. So that kind of stuff. So to prove that there's learning being done, right? Because obviously, like even if they're unschooling, they still have to prove some way the parent has some idea what they're doing, right? It's not just like you're skipping school and calling it homeschool. All right, to finish today's discussion, that if we understand this, the advantages, disadvantages, parents have to pick what's best for them. But they should know that when a child reaches secondary school level, high school level, then it's a lot easier, way easier, because now a child needs credits. So they don't have to worry anymore about curriculum and stuff because they just enroll the child into online high school. Alhamdulillah, there's online high school. A child can finish the whole high school. And there's many ways: synchronous learning, asynchronous learning. So yeah, we can have teacher, no teacher kind of style. You can have that, and again, like I know many high school students are doing that right now. It has its pros and cons. Maybe it's another discussion another time, but it is also available. So that makes it easier because in high school they need to enroll in their school. Then from there they enroll into the online high school and they can get credits, and they can graduate. Ultimately, they can graduate faster or slower. Yes, it's possible. But obviously, what's important is that the children, if they got to the high school level with solid grounding, then yeah, alhamdulillah, it's very, easy from then on. But the hard part, obviously, is that for parents, when they're committing, they have to decide early, homeschool or Islamic school or private school or private tutor. And it's not only one way or another. Like you probably notice many kids have all these experiences. They went to public school for some time because they need some program there. Then they went to Islamic school. Then they went homeschooling. Then they came out again to the public institution for and post-secondary. So, everyone's education experiences are different. But what's very important is that it has to be Islamic education along the way, the whole way through. So today we spoke all about public schools, Islamic schools, online schools, homeschooling. This is all what? Secular education. Where is the Islamic education? That's a lazim. That's a necessary binding effort all across the board, no matter what school your child does. And next week, I'm going to talk about that. Like at 5 years old, what are you supposed to teach your children, right? Because they're very young. Is it time for Hifz al-Quran? How much Hifz, what should they do? Should they go to madrasa for Hifz or should they do it at home? Should they start with, the Islamic study like texts, right? How do you teach them at that age? Because again, children that age are very, so there's also that. So the reason I want to finish with this point is that even if a parent is homeschool, when they finish the secular stuff, they got to do Islamic stuff. When they're doing Islamic school, parents must follow up with Islamic schools and ask them, what are you teaching the children? What are they learning? And what milestones are there too? Because that's another problem we have. Islamic schools or not, most parents do not give enough effort and attention to Islamic education. And this is why you find kids who go to Islamic school for so many years, yet they know nothing but Deen of Allah. It's very bad, right? Because it's not being nurtured. And it's possible that kids are homeschooled and they're very educated about the Deen because parents made deliberate efforts to get them to learn. But even then, it's not necessary or necessitated. It has to be offered. So one of the things the parents have to also think about is they're getting the schooling going. They don't tell their kids either with their tongue or with their actions that Islamic schooling and education is not important. I think this is one of the biggest challenge because children learn from what they see and what they hear. What is valuable? For example, is there any consequences for not doing Islamic studies? Is the Quran considered important? How does my mother and father react when I don't do my Quran or Islamic studies? How do they react when I don't do my homework for other studies? What is the objectives? When I put that there, objectives for your child. Do you want your child to become an imam? Half of the Quran? Do you want to become a student of knowledge? What kind of post-secondary aspirations do you have for them? So, for example, for your child, you want them to go to Medina University or any Islamic university, then all they need is a high school diploma. Okay, so that means they have to get certain basics done and a high school diploma, then they can apply. What about if I want my child to become an engineer or doctor? So I'll talk about that next week, because this is where I believe some parents really get mixed up. You have to do both. You have to teach both, right? But the idea is end in mind. End in mind. If you already know you want your child to have a certain career aspiration, or you're hoping that they can do that, again, we could talk about that later. How do you know what a child should do when they grow up? But you should plan in that in mind. Homeschooling can help accelerate maybe a child who's trying to become a Islamic, da'i or scholar, or that's going to be part of their profession. Homeschooling can also probably accelerate a child who's also trying to secular studies. Both are good, but you have to have that in mind. You can't. It's not something that parents should just kind of like be guessing. It should be plan in mind and working towards that goal diligently. Bidnillah ta'ala. Inshallah, I'll stop at this much. If any questions, we'll take them. Bidnillah ta'ala. Let me see. Okay.